Juanita, a black humanitarian in casual attire, enters Bank of America's flagship Charlotte branch to deposit $250,000 for her Jordan Relief Fund, only to face overt prejudice from staff sneers, smirks, and accusations led by Clare Jensen, who deems her unworthy. Her husband, Michael Jordan, a billionaire with vast influence, intervenes, exposing the bank's bias. CEO Brian Moynihan, fearing Michael's financial leverage, agrees to fire staff, retrain thousands, and fund Juanita's cause. 3 months later, at the National Equity Forum, Juanita's vision of equity begins to reshape the bank, with Clare among the first to change. The late morning sun poured through the towering glass doors of Bank of America's flagship branch in Charlotte, its rays splintering into a kaleidoscope of light across the polished marble plaza outside. The building loomed like a temple to wealth, its sleek facade a silent proclamation of power and exclusivity, designed to awe and intimidate in equal measure. Inside, the lobby was a cavern of opulence marble floors stretching toward infinity, chandeliers casting prisms of crystal light, the air heavy with the scent of polished leather and faint traces of expensive cologne. Every detail, from the gleaming brass fixtures to the hushed efficiency of the staff, whispered a single truth. This was a place for the privileged, a fortress where wealth dictated worth, and those who didn't fit the mold were intruders. Juanita stepped through the doors, her soft gray sweatpants brushing lightly against her legs, her plain white t-shirt slightly wrinkled from a morning spent sorting donations at a warehouse for her non-profit. At 38, her dark skin bore the faint etchings of a life driven by purpose, late nights drafting relief mission plans, days spent shouldering the struggles of communities half a world away. Her eyes, sharp and steady, held a quiet fire, and her movements carried an unshakable poise, not the practiced elegance of wealth, but the deep-rooted confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Beside her walked Michael Jordan, not the basketball icon, but a billionaire titan of industry, his navy suit tailored to a razor's edge, a platinum Patek Philippe watch glinting at his wrist, engraved with the date of their first meeting 15 years ago. At 45, Michael was a shadow king. His empire, Jordan Enterprises, spanning tech innovation, real estate, and private equity. His deals with giants like Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, Jamie Dimon, and Jeff Bezos didn't just move markets. They reshaped the nation's economic spine. Yet his power was understated, carried in the measured cadence of his voice, the deliberate restraint of his gestures, making it all the more formidable. "You sure you want to do this alone?" Michael asked, his deep voice softening with a tenderness reserved solely for her. He tilted his wrist, checking the time, the engraved watch a quiet reminder of their bond, a courthouse wedding, a shared promise forged in mutual respect. "Absolutely," Juanita replied, her smile warm as she squeezed his hand, her gold wedding band catching the light. "The foundation's my world, Michael. I don't need a suit to run it." Their marriage was a delicate balance of contrasts. Michael thrived in the high-stakes arenas of Wall Street and Silicon Valley, brokering billion-dollar mergers over cigars and whiskey. His network, a web of titans, Musk owed him for a Tesla bailout. Buffett leaned on his real estate ventures. Dimon sought his counsel in crises. Bezos kept him on speed dial after a $500 million logistics deal. Juanita, born to a working-class black family in Georgia, had chosen a different path. From a small idea, she'd built the Jordan Relief Fund into a lifeline for Africa's poorest, feeding thousands, building clinics, and now planning schools in rural Kenya. She shunned the trappings of their wealth, no chauffeurs, no penthouse galas, preferring a modest home where she could hear her own thoughts. Today, she was here for a rare in-person errand, depositing $250,000 raised for those schools and opening an account for the program, a task that demanded her signature in a world that rarely welcomed her kind. "I've got a call with Dimon in the lobby," Michael said, referring to JP Morgan Chase's CEO, a frequent collaborator. "We're finalizing a $3 billion infrastructure deal. Won't be long." He flashed a reassuring grin, his eyes lingering on her with a quiet pride before he turned toward a corner of the lobby. The vastness of the space swallowed them as they entered, and the staff's reaction to Michael was instantaneous, like a ripple across still water. Tellers behind the counter straightened their spines, their pens pausing mid-motion. A branch manager in a charcoal suit tugged nervously at his tie, his eyes tracking Michael's path. A security guard near the entrance shifted his weight, his posture snapping to attention. Michael's bespoke suit and measured stride radiated authority, the kind that didn't need to shout his presence alone, signaling the weight of $400 million in the bank's vaults, with billions more tied to his allies' portfolios. The staff saw him and saw power, deference etched into their every glance. But Juanita? As she moved away from his side, their eyes shifted and the air changed. Her casual sweatpants, her black skin, her unadorned presence became a lightning rod for judgment. A young teller with slicked back hair flicked his gaze over her, his lips twitching into a faint smirk before he looked away, dismissing her as irrelevant. A middle-aged woman in a crisp navy blazer at the next counter tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she scanned Juanita from head to toe, her mouth pursing in a silent verdict of not one of us. The security guard, his hand hovering near his radio, leaned forward slightly, his shoulders tensing as if she were a potential threat rather than a client. Juanita felt the weight of their stares, a familiar sting, the teacher who'd assumed she'd cheat, the landlord who'd questioned her rent check, the stranger who'd clutched their purse tighter. Here, in this gilded fortress, the staff's silent scrutiny was a chorus, each glance and gesture reinforcing a hierarchy where her existence was an anomaly, her worth measured by their biases before she'd even spoken. She approached the customer service desk, her steps steady despite the invisible barriers rising around her. Michael settled into a leather armchair near the entrance, his voice a low hum as he connected with Diamond. "Jamie, we need to lock this down by Friday. Buffett's already on board." Sunlight streamed through the glass, catching the glint of Juanita's wedding band, her only jewelry, a simple relic from their courthouse vows, as she stopped before Clare Jensen, the desk's gatekeeper. Clare, 40, wore her blonde hair pulled into a tight chignon, her white blouse pressed to a razor's edge, her manicured nails gleaming under the chandelier light. But her eyes told a different story, a storm of resentment brewed beneath her polished facade. Passed over for a promotion to a younger, whiter colleague from the Raleigh branch, she'd spent the morning simmering, her pride bruised, her authority itching for a target. When she looked up and saw Juanita, a black woman in sweatpants, standing calmly with a folder in hand, her gaze hardened, her lips curling into a faint sneer as if Juanita's presence was a personal affront to the order of her world. "Good morning," Juanita said, her tone steady and polite, honed by years of navigating spaces that bristled at her existence. "I'd like to make a deposit and open a new account." Clare didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, a deliberate slight, her fingers pausing mid-keystroke as she leaned back in her chair, her eyes raking over Juanita with a cold, dissecting stare. The wrinkled t-shirt, the soft gray sweatpants, the dark skin beneath, they weren't just details to Clare. They were evidence, a case to be built against Juanita's legitimacy. "Do you have an account with us?" Clare finally asked, her voice sharp, each word wrapped in a formality that barely masked her contempt. Her gaze lingered on Juanita's face, then dropped pointedly to her outfit, her expression tightening as if the very idea of Juanita standing there was an insult to the bank's prestige. The other staff took their cues. A teller nearby shifted his weight, his smirk widening as he caught Clare's tone. The navy blazer woman adjusted a stack of papers, her lips pursing tighter, a silent nod of agreement. The security guard edged closer, his hand now resting firmly on his radio, his eyes locked on Juanita with a vigilance that screamed suspicion. "No, this is a new relationship," Juanita replied, unfazed, sliding a thick folder across the desk, neatly organized, tabbed with precision, the product of hours spent ensuring every detail was airtight. "It's for the Jordan Relief Fund. We're launching a school building program in Kenya." Clare's eyes darted to the folder, catching the $250,000 check nestled inside, and for a fleeting moment, surprise flickered across her face. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a deeper suspicion, as if the sum itself were proof of something illicit. She leaned forward, her chair creaking faintly, and her voice took on a new edge, loud enough to draw attention from nearby desks. "That's a substantial amount," she said, her tone thick with accusation, her stare boring into Juanita like a prosecutor sizing up a suspect. Where did this money come from? The question wasn't just a formality. It was a challenge, a dare for Juanita to justify her presence, to prove she wasn't what Clare had already decided, a fraud, a trespasser in a space reserved for those who looked the part. The lobby responded in kind, a murmur rippled through the staff, the teller's smirk, now a full grin, as he leaned toward a colleague, whispering something that made her eyebrows shoot up. The navy blazer woman crossed her arms, her head tilting in smug approval. An older man in a pinstriped suit behind the counter coughed, his eyes glinting with amusement as he watched Claire take charge. "We raised it at our annual benefit last month," Juanita answered, her voice calm, her composure a shield against the rising tide of hostility. "It's all there, our 501c3, donor records, tax filings. We've got letters from the Kenyan government, too." She gestured to the folder, her movements deliberate, inviting Claire to verify the truth. But Claire didn't touch it. She didn't even glance at the documents, her manicured hand resting idly on the desk, as if the proof was irrelevant, as if Juanita's words were air to be ignored. Instead, she leaned back, her sneer deepening, and raised her voice further, ensuring every ear in the lobby could hear. "I'm sorry, but we don't open accounts of this size without thorough verification," she said, the word thorough dripping with disdain. "Bank of America isn't some corner credit union, it's for a specific clientele." The phrase landed like a slap, and Claire's eyes locked onto Juanita's, her gaze heavy with the unspoken message. "You're not one of them." The staff amplified her verdict, the teller's grin spread, his pen tapping a triumphant rhythm. The pinstriped man adjusted his glasses, his lips curling into a thin smile. The security guard took a step closer, his hand tightening on his radio, ready to act on Claire's command. Even a woman in pearls and tweed near the counter, waiting for her own transaction, clutched her purse tighter, her eyes wide with agreement, as if Juanita's presence threatened the very order of the space. Juanita's jaw tightened, a flicker of heat rising in her chest, but she held her ground, her dignity a fortress. "Our CFO spoke with your branch manager yesterday," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the thickening air. "Everything's been pre-approved." Claire's smile was a brittle thing, her eyes narrowing to slits as she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss meant to wound. "Miss Jordan, our high net worth clients expect a certain standard," she said, waving a manicured hand at Juanita's sweatpants, pausing deliberately to let the gesture settle on her dark skin, her sneer twisting into something almost triumphant. "I'm not convinced this fits." The subtext was a neon sign, "You're black, you're casual, you don't belong," and the staff's reactions were a silent ovation. The navy blazer woman nodded openly now, her arms still crossed, her lips pursed in righteous approval. The teller chuckled under his breath, his eyes darting to Claire as if she'd just landed a blow. The pinstriped man leaned forward, his amusement barely concealed, as if watching a performance unfold. The security guard's stance widened, his hand now gripping his radio, his gaze fixed on Juanita with a vigilance that screamed trouble. "Is there an issue with the documentation?" Juanita asked, her voice a steel thread, her eyes locking onto Claire's, refusing to yield to the weight of the room. Claire's smirk widened, her confidence bolstered by the staff's unspoken support. She leaned closer, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Let's cut the act," she said, each word laced with venom. "People moving $250,000 don't look like they just wandered in from a thrift store or like you. It raises red flags." The accusation landed like a fist, steeped in the tired, toxic myth of black unworthiness, and the lobby's response was immediate. The teller's chuckle grew louder, his colleague nudging him with a knowing glance. The navy blazer woman uncrossed her arms, her head tilting with a smug, "I knew it." The pinstriped man coughed again, masking a laugh, his eyes glinting with approval. The pearls and tweed woman gasped softly, her hand tightening on her purse, her nod to Claire a quiet endorsement. Claire's voice rose again, her finger jabbing toward Juanita. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at a bank that caters to your demographic," she said, the word dripping with condescension. "I'd hate for this to get messy. I can have security here in 10 seconds. The threat hung in the air, and the staff's complicity tightened like a noose. The security guard stepped forward, his radio crackling faintly, his eyes locked on Juanita. The teller leaned back, his grin now a full smile, as if anticipating a spectacle. The navy blazer woman's nod became a slow, deliberate affirmation, her lips curling upward. Juanita's breath caught, memories flashing. Her father frisked for no reason, her brother denied a loan despite perfect credit. The countless times her worth had been questioned before she could speak, but she straightened, her voice steady, her dignity unyielding. The Jordan Relief Fund has fed 30,000 families and built 12 clinics in Africa, she said, her words clear and deliberate. This money's for kids who've never held a book. That's what you're questioning. Across the lobby, Michael hung up with Diamond Good, I'll call Musk tonight, and turned just as Claire's finger jabbed toward his wife. His pulse spiked, not with rage, but with the icy certainty of his leverage $400 million in the bank's vaults, billions more tied to his allies, a network that could spark a financial avalanche with one move. He crossed the floor, his Italian leather shoes silent on the marble, the air bending as staff instinctively cleared his path, their earlier deference to him now clashing with the disdain they'd heaped on Juanita. The teller's grin vanished, his pen dropping. The navy blazer woman's nod froze, her eyes darting to the floor. The security guard stepped back, his hand falling from his radio, his posture softening under Michael's gaze. Is there a problem? Michael's voice was a low rumble, a storm brewing beneath calm waters, his presence filling the space like a gathering thunderhead. Claire spun, irritation flashing before recognition hit like a brick. Her face drained to ash as she clocked Michael Jordan, the man whose name opened doors and closed fates, while the staff around her wilted, their smugness evaporating into panic. The teller's hands fumbled, knocking over a stack of forms. The navy blazer woman's arms dropped, her lips parting in a silent gasp. The pinstriped man straightened, his amusement replaced by a nervous cough. The security guard retreated further, his radio now silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Sir, I was just assisting this woman," Claire stammered, her hands scrambling for the folder she'd ignored, her voice trembling as her earlier bravado crumbled. "That woman is my wife," Michael said, each word a deliberate strike, his hand resting on Juanita's shoulder as a quiet anchor, his gaze piercing Claire with unrelenting force. Claire's mouth opened, then snapped shut, her eyes wide with the realization that she'd misjudged not just Juanita, but the man whose influence could erase her career and the bank in a heartbeat. "Your wife?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Juanita Jordan," Michael replied, his tone unyielding, his eyes sweeping the lobby, taking in the staff's frozen faces, the teller's flushed cheeks, the navy blazer woman's averted gaze, the pinstriped man's sudden interest in his shoes, founder of the Jordan Relief Fund. "She's here to open an account for a program that's saving lives in Africa." He nodded at the untouched check on the desk, his voice hardening. "You judged her for her skin and her sweatpants, not her character. Your staff watched, smirked, nodded along some protocol. Mr. Jordan, I misunderstood." Claire's voice cracked, her hands clutching the folder now, her eyes darting to the staff for support that never came. "Misunderstood?" Michael's voice cut like glass, his step forward shrinking the space between them. "You accused her of stealing. You threatened security. Your teller grinned, your colleague nodded, your guard was ready to pounce. Is that how you treat black clients, or just the ones you think don't belong?" The lobby went still, a graveyard of held breaths, the staff's earlier complicity now a weight they couldn't escape. From a glass-walled office above, Brian Moynihan, Bank of America's CEO, watched the scene unfold, his face tightening with dread. He'd met Michael 3 years ago at a Davos summit, watched him broker a $10 billion energy deal over coffee. He knew the stakes. Michael's $400 million was just the start. One call to Buffett could pull $2 billion. A word to Musk could empty Tesla's accounts. This wasn't a dispute. It was a reckoning. Brian descended the spiral staircase, his polished shoes clicking, his forced smile barely masking his urgency. "Mr. Jordan," he said, extending a hand, "what's happening here?" "Your staff humiliated my wife," Michael replied, his tone arctic, his eyes locking onto Brian's. "They sneered, they judged, they threatened her all while I stood 10 feet away, unnoticed. That's the bank you run." Brian glanced at Juanita, then Claire, whose bravado had dissolved into a puddle of fear, the staff around her now pale shadows of their earlier arrogance. "Conference room," he said, his voice tight. "Now, Mr. Jensen, stay where you are." The conference room was a sleek sanctuary mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Charlotte's skyline, the hum of the city muted behind thick glass. Brian shut the door, his polished demeanor cracking as he faced them, his hands clasped to steady himself. "This is beyond unacceptable," he said, his voice low but strained. "I apologize to you both personally and on behalf of Bank of America. This isn't just one employee's failure. It's a culture that let your wife walk in and be sized up, dismissed, and threatened before she could even speak." Michael sat, his posture rigid, his presence filling the room like a storm about to break. It's not about us, he said, his voice steady but laced with steel. It's about every black person who faces your staff's eyes, their smirks, their assumptions, the moment they step through your doors. You're not running a bank, you're running a gatekeeper for prejudice. Juanita leaned forward, her voice calm but piercing, her eyes locking onto Brian's with the weight of a lifetime's worth of slights. I grew up in a trailer park, Brian, she said, each word deliberate. My mom worked 2 jobs so I could eat. I've been followed in stores, questioned by cops, stared at by people like your staff my whole life. Today, they saw sweatpants and black skin and decided I was a thief before I opened my mouth. The teller smirked. The woman nodded. The guard reached for his radio. What happens to the black mechanic with his savings? The kid with a scholarship check? Do they get the same sneers? The same threats? Brian's hands clenched on the table, his knuckles whitening, the weight of a bank built on exclusivity pressing down. I hear you, he said, his voice tight with the knowledge that Michael's network could unravel everything. What do you want us to do? Fire every employee involved, Michael said, his voice flat as stone, his mind already 3 moves ahead. Claire, her team, anyone who watched and didn't stop it, the teller, the woman, the guard, the man who laughed. Gut your culture mandatory anti-racism training, new hiring rules, 0 tolerance for this. And partner with our foundation $5 million to build schools in Africa, plus internships for black students here. Prove you mean it. Juanita added, her voice soft but unyielding. Your staff thinks wealth has a color, a uniform. Fix that, or it's not just us you'll lose. Brian swallowed hard, sweat beading at his temples. The specter of Michael's influence, $400 million of his own, billions more from allies, a PR disaster that could tank the stock looming large. Done, he said, his voice resolute. Claire and her crew are gone today. I'll sign the terminations myself. The training starts next week. I'll oversee it. The partnership, I'll have legal drafted by Friday. I know what you can do, Michael. I'm not gambling with that. A soft knock broke the tension. Elijah Tran, a young associate with wire-rimmed glasses, slipped in, clutching the completed paperwork. Mrs. Jordan, he said, his voice quiet but earnest. Your foundation saved my uncle's village in Nigeria. He's got a clinic now. He's vaccinating kids. Thank you. Juanita's face softened, a rare crack in her armor, her eyes brightening with purpose. What's his name? She asked, her voice warm. Kofi, Elijah replied, a faint smile breaking through. Tell Kofi he's why I keep going, she said, her gaze steady, grounding her in the work that defined her. Outside, Claire stood frozen by her desk, her hands clasped tight, the staff's eyes now on her as Juanita and Michael emerged, the lobby a silent jury. The teller's flush deepened, his hands shoved into his pockets. The navy blazer woman busied herself with papers, avoiding their gaze. The pinstriped man retreated behind the counter, his earlier amusement gone. Juanita paused, pulling a card from her pocket, a flyer for a community workshop. You can't erase today, she said to Claire, her voice low but firm, her eyes searching for something redeemable. But you can learn. We're training volunteers next week. Come if you want to see what I see. Claire took the card, her fingers trembling, tears welling as the weight of her actions sank in. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know. You didn't want to, Juanita said, not unkindly, her gaze steady before she turned and walked away, Michael at her side, their steps a quiet defiance of the space that had tried to diminish her. 3 months later, Charlotte's Convention Center buzzed with 1,000 voices as Juanita stepped onto the stage at the National Equity Forum. Her sweatpants and t-shirt were gone, replaced by a simple black dress, still understated, still her. Cameras flashed, a giant screen, blaring Jordan Relief Fund plus Bank of America, dismantling bias, building futures. The crowd surged to its feet, a thunderous ovation shaking the rafters. Brian Moynihan sat in the front row, his tie loosened, his face etched with the exhaustion of upheaval. He'd fired 16 staff, including Claire, the teller, the navy blazer woman, and others who'd watched and sneered, retrained 3,000, and wired $5 million to Juanita's Kenyan schools. Michael's shadow had forested a single call to Diamond, had pulled $100 million in JP Morgan accounts as a warning shot. A text to Musk had sparked rumors of a Tesla exodus. The bank had bent, then broken, then rebuilt, not out of virtue, but under the weight of a titan's leverage. Claire was there too, in the back, her 8-year-old son beside her, clutching a book from Juanita's workshop. She'd come that first week, sat silently as Juanita spoke of dignity and resilience, then returned with her boy, volunteering to pack supply kits a small step from the woman who'd once led a lobby in judgment. On stage, Juanita cited them anonymous but real as proof of change. "It's not about policy," she said, her voice carrying to the rafters, clear and unyielding. "It's about seeing people, really seeing them beyond their skin, their clothes, their story you've already written for them. We're not done, but we've started." Another ovation erupted, the sound a wave crashing over the room. Backstage, Michael waited, his suit jacket off, a rare grin softening his edges, his pride in her a quiet force. "You didn't just bend a bank," he said, pulling her close, his voice low with awe. "You cracked the world open." Juanita's eyes gleamed, fierce and certain, her fire undimmed. "It's not open yet," she said, her voice steady, a promise to herself and the world. "But we've got the tools now." The lights dimmed as they slipped into the crowd, not toward an ending, but a beginning, a movement born of one woman's quiet resilience, fueled by a titan's unyielding reach, aimed at a future where worth wasn't measured by a color, a suit, or a balance sheet, but by a life lifted, a hand extended, a story rewritten. The bank's staff, once a chorus of sneers, had been forced to confront their biases, their actions a mirror held up to a system that judged too quickly, too harshly, too blindly, a mirror that, for now, reflected the first glimmers of change.